Are you a leader, manager, entrepreneur, business owner, or knowledge worker? Are you leading people or wondering how to be a better leader in your own life and work? If you are, then you can be experimenting better. Welcome to The Experimental Leader, a podcast that takes a look at the ways leaders are experimenting in their own work. Hosted by Melanie Parrish, we dive into real-life conversations about how people might be using a scientist's mindset and experimenting in their work. Shift your leadership into something that works better. Join us on The Experimental Leader today.
Hey, it's so great to be here live with you today. I am hailing, you can see in the background, I'm hailing from my dad's house in New Mexico. And this morning I'm thinking about, for my own leadership, I'm thinking about like remote work. And I've been kind of nostalgic about, as I get set up to do a live podcast in my dad's house, what's the right background? I'm noticing the two flowers behind my head are like antenna, which I didn't see when I was looking earlier, but I like having antenna. I've been working remotely for 20 years. So I used to do all my coaching on phone calls, and then I went on Zoom, I don't know, 3 years ago or something. And it's so interesting to think about. In my head, I have this like incredible freedom that I can work anywhere. In fact, I tell my husband all the time, like, if you ever want to leave your job and move somewhere else, I'll just go. I'm so free. And I always have to set things up. Like I always have to think about, what do I need? And it's really an interesting exercise for me as a human, just to think, oh, what do I need today? Today I needed 3 little boxes, and I'm thankful I've been doing some online ordering and having things shipped here. And so I had 3 little boxes so I could change the height of things and position myself in different places in the house. And what do I need for cords, and what do I need for this and that? I remember 20 years ago or 19 years ago when I moved to Canada, I used to, it took us like weeks to get our phone line set up. So I used to stand at payphones and coach when I first moved to Canada. And so I had a little nostalgia about that this morning. And I think the question is a really good one. Like, what do I need as a leader to be good at what I do? So that's my question for you today is, what do you need as a leader to be good at what you do today? And I am super excited. I have Melissa Boggs here with me today, and she's a leadership coach and an employee experience design consultant. She's also the host of the Wild Hearts at Work podcast, redefining our relationship with work through stories and conversations, and those challenging the status quo of today's workplace. And I was on Melissa's podcast, and I love talking to her because she is an experimenter. And so, Melissa, I am super happy to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Melanie. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's great to see you and so fun to have you here. And we'll just dive right in. I'd love to know kind of what you're up to in your work life right now. What's going on for you?
Oh, it's surprisingly a busy time considering that we're going into the holidays. But so I am now consulting and working with leaders, working with organizations on their experiments in a way. I think this is why you and I hit it off so quickly, because in a lot of ways our podcasts are symbiotic, and just the work that we do is similar in a wonderful way. But I work with entire organizations. I work with individual leaders. And one of the things that I really focus on recently is the relationship between leaders and their employees. So there's often this like finger pointing that happens if there's a lack of trust between them, like, oh, the leader doesn't understand, or, oh, why aren't these employees working harder? And it's just become more obvious in this great resignation that we're in the middle of, that what's really happening is that we're not tending to the relationship between them enough. And that's where some of these experiments can come into play.
I love that you said that. I think I wrote an email this morning that's going out tomorrow that's all about that. Like the quality of your leadership is the quality of the conversations that you're having, both, to people that are reporting to you and people you report to. So, in all the directions, it's the more I talk about leadership, the more I think about leadership, the more I just feel like the free flow of information in a circle, like how do you share emotion? How do you share thoughts? How do you share hopes? And then how do you find some collaborative way to move everybody's hopes forward? Is the heart of leadership. It's not about the strategic plan. That's like too distant from our hearts somehow. I don't know. That's I've been thinking about that today too. It's really, I like that. And the finger pointing, like the two directional, it's so painful. I'm sure you come in when there's strife and it's trying to find that common ground and how to help is really, it's the work I love to do.
Yes, it's interesting because I thought I understood it until I actually became a CEO. And, in that moment or in that series of moments for the 2 years that I was in that role, I came to recognize like how often I was blaming my leaders for things that perhaps they had culpability in, but I too could have been designing a better relationship, between us. And so there's an empathy that I have now that as a coach, I'm able to kind of connect those dots in a different way, which is why I do focus so much on the relationship. I hope that that's in a way kind of what sets me apart from like a typical executive coach, because I don't sit there here and say, this is what you need to do as a leader. It's here's what we need to do to, like you said, find that common ground and, figure out how to improve the trust in the relationship. And that's what allows us to be strategic and do the strategic work. It's like you said, it's sort of foundational. But I did not come here to pitch, Melanie. So,
That's okay.
but yeah, I completely resonate with everything you said. Of course, because it's you, and that's how we work now.
I know, that's so funny. Well, before this, we were talking about some experiments that you did before around hiring. And, I do some hiring consulting and often I get called in. I use DISC a lot to try to guess, but you shared an experiment that you did with hiring that I really want to talk about because I want to find out what you did and what worked and what you learned, and I want to learn all the things. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So, at the organization where I had the privilege of leading, um, we were just finding, like most people, that hiring was taking too long. It was too painful. And going into an interview that either whether you're the interviewer or the interviewee, that you're just going to be in this dance where you're going to try to ask the right questions, and if you're the interviewee, you're going to try to answer it in the way that you think they want you to answer it. And it's really difficult to actually get down to, is this a good fit for either party? So this is a key component in why we did hiring events. I am a huge believer that the interviewee, the candidate, or in our case, we called them our guests, is just as much interviewing the company as the company is interviewing them. And I think a lot of us say that, but then we still go through the same song and dance, right? We still act like, as the interviewers, that we are superior because we have the job that you want. And I kind of came into it going, I don't know if I have the job you want. You may not want this job. And at Scrum Alliance, and this was one of many experiments that we did as an organization. And so I wanted to also make sure that they knew who we were that if you are saying yes to a job with us, that it's enthusiastically, passionately, because you understand who we are and that we're also not presenting, our perfect selves. I wanted to do away with that, do away with the perfect self in the interview. So what we did is we designed a day. And I do have to give credit. Some of this was based on Menlo Innovation's extreme interviewing. Richard Sheridan is a friend, and I love what they did. His book Joy Inc., if you're curious about that. But I always do like to tease him, like I took it a step further. So we designed a day of games and conversations, no resumes for the most part, and come in and let's figure out if we would actually do well working together. And so that day consisted of something called the empathy toy. We would actually have them come in and partner with an existing team member, and we're in like a big room. Oh, I didn't add that part. They all came at the same time, the candidates.
Love that.
So if, depending on the role, if we had, 8 candidates, and we called them guests because we felt like the candidate phrase sort of implied that superiority of us. And so we would call them our guests. But picture us like all in a room, and the empathy toy is a set of blocks that you basically sit back to back, and one person describes what you're trying to build. You know, the game used to do where like you had to make a peanut butter sandwich blindfolded, and like your partner would tell you like how to make the peanut butter sandwich. Basically that, but with blocks. And it was all about like you learn a lot about their ability to communicate, their ability to work through a problem with someone, if they were frustrated and you're like on both sides of the designer or the builder. So that was one thing that we did. We did a lean coffee where basically we'd bring everyone in who was part of that craft, like who already did that role at the company, and the candidates. And they would just have a conversation about their craft. It wasn't interview questions. It wasn't, it was like a fully 2-way or 8-way conversation about, what are the important topics to software developers today? What do you think about quality? What do you think about test automation? What do you think about, I'm not a developer. I probably picked the wrong road to go down just now, but just to have a real conversation, because these are the people on a daily basis that you're going to be having these conversations with anyway. And it was also like, are we capable of making space for them? Are they capable of making space for us in the conversation itself? So that was lean coffee. We did a speed interview round. If you think about speed dating, where you like move chairs and you only have a certain amount of time at each chair. So we would position our team members at a chair, and then the guests would get to rotate and talk to each one of the team members. What else did we do? We also did like silly games. Like I was known for doing rock, paper, scissors tournaments at just our regular all hands. So we would do it, at the hiring events. And again, the whole point of this was we want to get to know you, but we want you to get to know us too. And the other thing is, through this series of activities, it was impossible for either side to be fake. Like you can't be fake when you are putting together blocks because, your mind is like in the game, not in trying to, figure out what it is you want me to say. And so we hired some of our best people through these hiring events. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of work on both sides, I think, because again, you're having to be real, and it was a little scary sometimes, but it was pretty incredible.
I have so many questions. Like I'm so fascinated by this. So when you were looking, like, was there a feedback portion, like at the end of speed interviewing or anything where people like said, oh, I liked this person? How did you gather feedback? That's my first question.
Yes. So we broke at lunch, and then we broke, obviously at the end of the day. And so there was always like a moment at each of those junctures where we would bring everyone together and just start collecting feedback. And we wouldn't say like, I like this person or I don't. But we would say like, here's what I'm observing. I want to learn more about this with this person. Here's the very, very funny thing though. One thing we didn't count on is in my tenure there, we probably did half a dozen of these. And every time, I'm pretty sure, without our prompting, the candidates would go to lunch together. Like these people who are competing for the same job, but if you think about it, are in the same craft and are in this crazy, weird thing together, are like, let's go to lunch. So I always thought it was pretty cool that they, they were debriefing us too. Like, they were at lunch and they were like, what did you think about this person? So yeah, we would collect the feedback, and at the end of the day, we would essentially vote. I say we, but generally I stayed out of the final decision unless there was, some sort of tiebreaker that needed to be made or whatever. But generally, it was the people who were on the cross-functional team that the person was going to be working with that would say, like, yes, this is the right person for our team. I will say that
was there like, did a sort of consensus emerge? Like, in this environment, did people have the same experience of people and they were sure of who they wanted?
Most of the time.
Yeah.
I would really say most of the time it became really clear. And there were also times where it was like, it's clear that this person is right for our team, and then this other person is probably right for our org, but we don't have a role right now. We would always tell people, like, part of the reason that we did it this way is we wanted to develop relationships with people who did the same work that we did in our local area. This was pre-pandemic. And so we actually did have at least one instance where someone wasn't right for the specific team, but we ended up calling them back in the future because they were right for the company, and there was an opportunity in a different team later. But yeah, generally there was consensus, which I hoped for, but didn't necessarily anticipate when I was sort of designing this and working through it. So generally there is consensus. I'll add one other thing that was quite crazy. We actually did one where we actually had multiple roles all at the same time. So we actually had almost like multiple events going on at the same time, because some of the things, it didn't matter which role you were, like the empathy toy game. It didn't matter if you were a developer or a digital marketer. We're just working on the toy, and then they kind of separate and go talk about their craft. And so there was one particular day that I think we hired 6 people in one day.
Wow.
Through this series of events.
I have another question about, were there personality types or certain behaviors that just got people off the list? Like, what were the things people did that just made everybody go, no?
Well, so we were really on fire, I will say, about our values as an organization. And so that was one of the things that was always a criteria in the back of our head. Now, understanding people act differently under stress, and we knew that, and we would do our very best at the beginning of the day to put people at ease. That's why we did empathy toy first, because it put you in this like childlike mindset. It people would tell us later, like, that did put them at ease, because like, how bad can it be if I'm playing a game of blocks? But yes, we would definitely be looking out for not culture fit, where we didn't want everyone to be exactly the same, but does this person demonstrate the type of behaviors that align with our values? And that sounds like total, like, I don't know, cliche line when I say that out loud, but truly, like, that was a very important thing to us.
And I'm not sure, it's kind of a general question, but what was your big learning from this whole process? Like, what are you left with after some time has passed? after you had these successful days? Like what's left as the takeaways for you from that experiment?
The experiments are worth it. That's the takeaway. I remember the night before we did the first one, I was terrified, like literally terrified. And I woke up that morning and I thought I was going to vomit all morning. I was like, what have I done? This is crazy. Why am I doing this? Why don't I just do this? Is like this existential thing about myself. Like, why can't I just do what everyone else does? Why can't I just follow the path and do the 4 interviews? One of them is a group interview and boring. Um, and at the end of the day, um, like literally, not the phrase end of the day, but literally at the end of that day, we actually did ask the folks that were in that interview to kind of stick behind and give us feedback. And of course, we said this has no bearing on the choice that we're going to make, but it would help us to know what this experience was like for you, because the intent is for it to be good. The intent is not for us to, make people more stressed or upset or feel like it's harder. The intent was that it was easier. And one of the gentlemen got up and said, I was scared to death coming into this, because we were very clear with them when we invited them to the interview about what to expect. He's like, I was scared to death. He's like, but I look around this room and I feel like if you chose any of these other 5 people, I would completely understand, because I know now that they're fantastic. I otherwise would have been sitting home thinking about my competitors, like you create this story for yourself about these other people. He's like, now I have 5 more friends, and who knows whether I get the job or not. But I appreciate that you're creating community. And I almost cried on the spot. I was like, this is exactly what I wanted. I wanted us to have an experience together that went beyond, am I going to get this job or not? So it was worth it. But it can be terrifying, like stepping out and doing something that is completely different from what anybody else does and not knowing what the result's going to be.
And I'm curious. So you hired 6 people in one day, which amazing. And how might somebody apply this if they weren't hiring 6 people at once? Like if they had a single hire, because gosh, it would be a lot of resources to pull full teams out for a day for, one hire, I think, but maybe not. I'm curious your thoughts on all of that.
Yeah. So most of them were just one role. That 6 people in one day across different teams and whatnot was an experiment within an experiment. Like, are we limited to doing just one? And for what it's worth, we actually only did that once, because it was actually a lot more, like exponential, more than 6 times the work to like manage all of that. So yes, very easily done with one role. To your question about like pulling people and time and whatnot, if you think about the amount of time that we spend doing 4 interviews across, because I think on average, most people end up doing 4 interviews. If you count the recruiter,
Yeah.
the manager, the team, etc. If you extrapolate that over however many candidates you end up needing to hire or to interview to get to your person, across 4 interviews and your team, and just the mental and emotional load that is required to do that, I think we save time and money.
I love this so much, because people can like it's almost like behavioral based interview questions on steroids. It's like you can tell me a time when you, and ask them what their behavior is, but instead you just observe their behavior.
Right.
And I know from years of hiring consulting and just profiling, people can hide it for an hour, but that's about it. Like after that, you're going to emerge, and it is always about fit. And I think to your point about people interviewing the company while the company is interviewing them, that's never more true than it is right now. Right now it is the employers are competing for the employees, not the other way around. Like, you want to be innovative, you want to be interesting, you want to be kind and compassionate, and I love this. That's why we just took so long to talk about it, because I just think it's fantastic, and I haven't heard about anybody doing it. Maybe I'm not in the loop or something, but I really enjoyed talking about this.
Yeah, thank you. I think we're the only ones who did it this particular way. Like I said, Menlo Innovations, they do a version of this, but they mainly only hire software developers. And so theirs is much more focused on coding and pair programming and whatnot. Um, but I asked Rich's permission. I'm like, can I iterate on what you did? Can I like do it different? But one thing I will add to your point about just competing for employees and whatnot. I have we had a staff member who is still a friend who has told me multiple times he wasn't looking for a job. He hadn't even updated his resume, but a friend of his was coming to the event and kind of nudged him and said, like, you should put your name in here too, just for the experience. Because this was probably our second or third one. So locally, there was a little bit of buzz, like people were starting to hear about it. And so he came, knocked it out of the park, and we ended up hiring him and was an incredible employee and wasn't even looking for a job. So there's something about this, like the difference of it, and like you said, like being kind of innovative just in our processes that drew people in. So for
So
whatever
you're
that's worth.
inviting people to a new dream of a relationship with a company.
Yes, I love that. Inviting people to a new dream.
Yeah, I think that goes. I think that contentious interviewing style of, we're going to ask you hard questions and you're going to answer the hard questions, like that belies the idea that the company has a dream when they post a position, and um, the employee, the person who wants the job, has a dream of a new role. Like, they have a dream of a new work life in some way, and really pairing those dreams and finding fit um, is just so important. Like, that the flow of the way people think and work is aligned. That's how you get really successful employees too. So you don't spend a lot of time trying to mitigate deficits or, solve for those things. So
I'll tell you one more very quick story. I promise to be quick.
yeah, no problem.
But this is indicative of the experiment itself. So for the first one, we sent out, again, like a pretty detailed explanation of what to expect when we invited people to the interview or to the hiring event. And we got back a message from a lady who was furious. She was absolutely furious. She was like, how dare you? This is, I don't want to be in the same room with the other candidates. I don't want this. I don't like, it was just, she was livid. And for a minute, like my heart sank into my stomach and I was like, oh my God, same thing. What have I done? And it was really funny because like my team member from HR kind of looked at me and she goes, no, this is perfect. She would have hated it here. Like truly. And she was right. Like if I look back through the email, I was like, everything that she talked about that she didn't like about what we were going to do, all of those things are representative of how we behaved every single day and like how we worked together and how our team operated. And that particular team member was like, this is great. Like you just filtered out someone, not that we wouldn't like them, but they would have been miserable here.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, yeah. So being yourself, even in the introductory email,
Yes.
is a really good way to figure that out. So,
well, and I think this is one of the pieces, I talk about it with my clients. You want to, if people are fully expressed as leaders, they're going to attract people to work with them that are going to like working with them. They're going to like the energy of all that. And as coaches, like being fully who we are as coaches, like if someone wants to spend a lot of time on strategic planning, I'm probably not their coach because I hate strategic plans. What's that?
I said high five.
You hate strategic plans too. Of course you do. We're like, we're so funny. It's like the fan club, fangirls for each other. Um, yeah, so I think all that's really interesting. I'd love for you to just tell people where they can find you, and also like if somebody is interested in this experimenting piece. I know that's something that you help leaders do. So talk about that too.
Cool, thank you. So definitely find me on LinkedIn. I'm also pretty active on Twitter at Melissa D, like Denise Boggs. I do have a website that is currently under construction. You can still find me there. It's just melissaboggs.com. I also do keynote speaking, so you can find me at melissaboggspeaks.com for more information about the talks that I give.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I love this deep dive that we did just into this one thing, because I think it's so powerful. So thank you so much for sharing your journey. It's just been a pleasure to be with you.
You too, Melanie. Thank you for having me.
Okay, bye-bye. Well, that was really fun. And I just love Melissa's spirit. I love that she talked about experimenting. Of course, that's near and dear to my heart. But what this was a really clear experiment. And the thing that I loved about it so much is that there was a clear intent behind it. We knew what we wanted to change. She wanted to change the way the hiring process felt in both directions. She also wanted to have better outcomes. And as somebody who does hiring, I really see how observing the behavior is better than hearing about the behavior. And so trying this experiment and then trying it multiple times. And then I love that she collected feedback, probably both internally, we didn't talk about that, but from the candidates as well, and got feedback on the process and was able to use that in her iterating and in their iterating as they did this. I really want you to think about where you can do some experimenting around processes that don't feel good, or around hiring processes. How can you change your hiring processes in ways? How can you experiment with that to get better outcomes, especially right now when things are so competitive? It's worth the effort to plan new processes right now because the stakes are so high, it's so competitive, and innovation is super attractive to the kind of candidates you want to attract. So my challenge to you is figure out where you can experiment. It's been great being with you today. Go experiment.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of The Experimental Leader. We hope you have found value in today's episode because we're dedicated to helping you become the experimental leader you want to be. To access the show notes or learn more about working with Melanie, visit melanieparish.com. Go experiment.